The Devourer ships pursued the Times, Retribution Times, as it raced toward the outer system, their confidence growing with each passing minute. The human vessel had proven no different from the Kalari ships. Initial damage followed by adaptation and inevitable victory. Soon, they would add this strange new biomass to their collection. But Captain Webb wasn't running. He was positioning. "Commander Chen, are you linked with the Kalari evacuation fleet?" he asked, as the ship shuddered under pursuing fire. "Yes, sir. Commander Zephic is standing by." "Perfect. Lieutenant Rodriguez, status on our special preparations?" "All systems ready, Captain. The fabrication units have completed production, and the deployment drones are loaded and standing by. Close into the first of Artes." "All systems ready, Captain." Dr. Vasquez looked up from her science station with excitement. "Captain, the analysis is complete. I understand now why the Devourers have been so successful against other species. Enlighten us, Doctor. Every civilization they've encountered has fought them the same way. Find their weakness, exploit it, adapt tactics. When the enemy adapts to counter, it's logical, methodical, and predictable. The Devourers have learned to expect this pattern and evolved countermeasures. But humans don't fight logically, do we, Doctor?" Dr. Vasquez smiled. "No, sir. Humans fight dirty." No. The pursuit continued for another 30 minutes as the Times, Retribution Times, led the enemy ships deeper into the outer system, past the debris fields of destroyed Kalari installations. To the Devourers, it looked like a desperate flight toward empty space. They had no idea they were being led into a carefully prepared ambush. "All stop," Captain Webb ordered suddenly. The ship's engines cut out, and the Times Retribution Times drifted to a halt among the asteroids of the system's outer belt. "Sir?" Lieutenant Torres looked confused. "We're sitting ducks here. Exactly where we want to be. All hands, prepare for unconventional warfare protocols. Let's show these things what happens when you mess with humanity." The Devourer ships closed in, their organic hulls pulsing with anticipation. They had their prey cornered with nowhere to run. Their weapons began charging for what they assumed would be the final assault. That's when the Times Retribution Times revealed its true nature. "Deploy drones. Full spread," Captain Webb ordered. "Initiate protocol. Human chaos." Hundreds of small objects ejected from the Times Retribution's Times hull, spreading out in all directions like a metallic cloud. The Devourers slowed, uncertain about this new development. Their sensors couldn't classify the objects. They weren't weapons in any conventional sense. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, commence firing sequence Alpha." "Sir, that's going to hit everything in the area, including us." "I'm counting on it. Execute." The Times Retribution Times opened fire again, but not at the enemy ships. Instead, it targeted the debris field around them, the asteroids, even some of its own deployed drones. Explosions blossomed throughout the area as the ship seemed to attack everything randomly. The Devourer ships paused, confused by this apparently suicidal behavior. Their adaptive minds struggled to process tactics that made no logical sense. Then the real attack began. The objects the Times Retribution Times had deployed weren't passive drones. They were mobile weapons platforms, each one equipped with a different experimental weapon system. As they spread throughout the battlefield, they began firing at the enemy ships with weapons the Devourers had never encountered. Sonic disruptors that attacked the enemy's organic nervous systems. Nano-plague bombs that infected their hulls with self-replicating destruction. Temporal distortion fields that slowed down their adaptive responses. Psychological warfare emitters that broadcast pure chaos directly into their alien minds. But that was just the beginning. Phase 2 deployment. Captain Webb announced calmly, as enemy fire began to impact the Times Retribution's time shields. "Release the hounds." New objects emerged from the ship's cargo bays, larger this time, and moving with purpose. These weren't weapons at all, but something far more dangerous. Human military engineering drones, programmed with every dirty trick, improvised weapon, and unconventional tactic in the species' long history of warfare. The drones immediately began scavenging material from the debris field, constructing weapons from whatever they could find. Asteroid fragments became kinetic bombardment systems. Destroyed Kalari ships were converted into guided missiles. Even space dust was weaponized into high-velocity sandblasting arrays. The Devourers tried to adapt, but how do you develop resistance to weapons that change faster than you can evolve? Each time they built defenses against one attack, 3 new threats appeared from different directions. Commander Chen, signal the Kalari ships. Tell them it's time for the grand finale. Sir, they're asking what they should do. Tell them to aim for the big one in the center and fire everything they've got. Doesn't matter if it's effective, we just need noise and distraction. The surviving Kalari vessels emerged from hiding and joined the chaotic battle, their precise energy beams adding to the madness. Their weapons were still ineffective against the adapted Devourer hulls. But that wasn't the point. The point was to create so much chaos that the enemy couldn't focus on any single threat. Now for the real surprise, Captain Webb said, moving to the weapons console himself. Doctor, are you certain about the biological analysis? Absolutely, Captain. Despite their adaptations, they're still organic creatures. They still have the same fundamental weaknesses as any living thing. Excellent. Lieutenant Rodriguez, prepare the special delivery. Deep in the Times Retribution's Times cargo hold, automated systems activated a container that had been manufactured during their pursuit. Inside wasn't a weapon in any conventional sense. It was something far simpler and far more devastating. Earth bacteria. Specifically, every aggressive, rapidly evolving, environmentally adaptive microorganism that human scientists could pack into a single biological warfare package. Strains that consumed organic matter, others that disrupted nervous systems, and some that simply reproduced so quickly they overwhelmed any biological system they encountered. Deploy biopackage via torpedo delivery, Captain Webb ordered. Target the lead Devourer ship. The torpedo streaked through the chaotic battlefield, weaving between the multiple conflicts happening simultaneously. It struck the largest Devourer ship and detonated, spreading its microscopic cargo across the creature's hull. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. The Devourer ship continued its attack, adapting to the new threats around it, as it had been doing throughout the battle. Then it began to shiver. The organism tried to adapt to the bacterial invasion, but human diseases had been evolving alongside humanity for millions of years. They were faster, more aggressive, and more adaptable than anything the Devourers had encountered. While the alien ship's hull tried to develop resistance to one strain, 3 others were already spreading through its system. Biological warfare, Captain? Dr. Vasquez asked with a mix of admiration and horror. Humans have been fighting germs longer than we've been fighting each other, Captain Webb replied. It seemed appropriate. The lead Devourer ship's hull began to show signs of decay as the bacterial weapons did their work. Dark patches spread across its surface, and the creature's movements became erratic. Its weapons fire grew wild and unfocused. But humans weren't done yet. Final phase, Captain Webb announced. Show them what we learned from their own tactics. The Times, Retribution Times, suddenly stopped its chaotic multi-vector attack and focused all its remaining firepower on a single point on the diseased Devourer ship's hull. But these weren't the same weapons they'd used before. Human engineers had been busy during the battle. They'd taken the Devourer adaptation patterns and reverse-engineered them, creating weapons that adapted in real time to become more effective against their targets. Quantum torpedoes that learned from each impact, plasma beams that evolved to penetrate specific hull compositions, and kinetic rounds that modified their own structure mid-flight. The combination of biological warfare, adapted weapons, and sheer overwhelming chaos was too much for even the Devourer ships to handle. The lead vessel began to break apart as its systems failed, dark fluids streaming into space as it died. The other Devourer ships suddenly stopped their attacks, their attention focused on their dying leader. For the first time in their long history, they had encountered something that could not only resist their adaptations but turn those same adaptations against them. They're retreating, Lieutenant Torres announced with amazement. All enemy ships are withdrawing from the system. Let them go, Captain Webb said quietly. But keep tracking them. I want to know exactly where they're headed. Commander Chen looked up from her communications station. Captain, I'm receiving transmissions from across the system. The Kalari evacuation is complete. All civilian populations have been successfully extracted. And the Devourer ships? Long-range sensors show them leaving the system entirely. They're fleeing. Dr. Vasquez was analyzing the battlefield data with obvious excitement. Captain, this is unprecedented. The Devourers have never retreated from a system before. They always consume everything before moving on. They've learned something new today, Captain Webb replied. That adaptation works both ways, and humans have been adapting to survive longer than their species has existed. Over the following hours, the Times Retribution Times worked with the surviving Kalari ships to establish temporary safe zones and begin damage assessment. The Kalari homeworld was badly damaged but not destroyed, and the civilian population had been saved thanks to the human intervention. Commander Zefek's ship docked with the Times Retribution Times for a formal meeting between the two species representatives. The Kalari commander was a tall, graceful being with 4 arms and large, expressive eyes that showed both gratitude and amazement. Captain Webb, Zefek said through the universal translator, my people owe you a debt that can never be repaid. When we sent our distress call, we hoped someone might send a fleet to help us. Instead, you sent something far more valuable. What's that, Commander? You sent humans. I have studied the battle recordings, and I still cannot understand how you defeated them. Your tactics made no logical sense, yet they were perfectly effective. Captain Webb smiled. Commander, humans have a saying, if you're in a fair fight, you've already made a mistake. We don't fight to be honorable or logical. We fight to win, and we'll use any advantage we can find. Dr. Vasquez added her own observations. The Devourer's weakness was their strength. Commander, they adapted so well to conventional warfare that they became vulnerable to unconventional approaches. They expected logic, so we gave them chaos. They expected adaptation, so we out-adapted them. But how did you know this would work? Captain Webb's expression grew serious. Because humans have been the underdogs for most of our history, Commander, we've had to fight bigger, stronger, more advanced enemies since we lived in caves. We learned that when you can't outfight someone, you outthink them. When you can't outthink them, you out-crazy them. The meeting continued for several hours as the two species shared technological and tactical information. The Kalari were amazed by human creativity in warfare, while the humans were impressed by Kalari precision and efficiency. As the Times Retribution Times prepared to return to Earth, Commander Zefek made one final request. Captain Webb, my people would be honored to establish formal diplomatic relations with humanity. We believe our species could learn much from each other. I think Earth would be very interested in that, Commander, but first, we need to track down where those Devourers went and make sure they understand they're not welcome in this part of the galaxy anymore. You would hunt them? Captain Webb looked out at the stars, thinking about other civilizations that might face the same threat the Kalari had encountered. Commander, those things have been destroying peaceful species for thousands of years. Someone needs to teach them that the galaxy has new rules now. And those rules are? Simple. Humans don't abandon their friends, and we don't tolerate bullies. The Devourers just learned both those lessons the hard way. As the Times Retribution Times engaged its jump drive for the trip home, Captain Webb reflected on what they'd accomplished. They'd saved an entire civilization and established humanity's reputation as a species that could handle threats other civilizations couldn't face. But more importantly, they'd sent a message to every predatory species in the galaxy. Humanity was watching, and they were not the easy prey that others had been. The stars held many dangers, but now they held something else as well. A species that fought dirty, thought creatively, and never gave up when their friends were in trouble. The Devourers would spread word of their defeat, and other hostile civilizations would learn to fear the unpredictable, chaotic, and utterly determined species from the small blue world that called itself Earth. Commander Zefek watched the human ship disappear into jump space and transmitted a message that would be remembered by his people for generations. Today we learned that sometimes the best answer to a cry for help is not a fleet of ships or an army of soldiers. Sometimes the best answer is a single vessel crewed by beings who refuse to fight fair, refuse to give up, and refused to let evil triumph. Today we learned what it means to have humans as allies,